Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Randy Veitenheimer. Before I bring him on, I'm going to remind you that you can always get new episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. Check us out on Rokfin. This is where you get our premium content. You can also get our regular shows and all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. Check out the amazing new podcast from the Forbidden Knowledge News Network, like Inception with Gloria Canning, Raised by Giants with Ryder Lee, Day Zero with myself, Cory Hughes, Charlie Robinson, and X-Cube 420, and a fifth rotating host occasionally. And finally, Dawson Time with Ryan Dawson and Cory Hughes. Those are all available on all podcast platforms right now. Tonight I want to welcome Randy Veitenheimer. He is the host of Gaia's original series, Quantum Effect, as well as a featured guest in Undisclosed. In these series, he explores the subjects of energy transformation, the human energy field, and much more. He has also appeared in Open Minds with Regina Meredith and Beyond Belief with George Norrie. He is an energy healer, and as a member of the Potawatomi tribe, he learned at a very young age the power of plants and vibration in the healing process. It was around the age of 19 that he began working his in-depth studies of martial arts, which led to other forms of energy transfer and healing practices from world-renowned masters and teachers. He then developed a healing method he calls creative energetic health. Randy, welcome. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, I've been looking forward tonight. I appreciate you joining us. It's going to be a fun show. We're going to discuss some of the fascinating topics that you cover on the quantum effect, such as what it means to be a conscious physical being, living in, like you say, a vast energetic ocean, as well as the nature of consciousness, duality of reality, healing methods, mind and soul, and death as transcendent. And we're going to have some fun while doing all that. Randy, this is your first time on Forbidden Knowledge News. I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led you down this amazing path that you're on.
How much time do we have?
Take your time.
I make a lot of references to music and movies and bad jokes. I think Big Trouble in Little Chinatown or something like that. One of those movies is it says it always starts with something simple, right? And I think that's true. A significant event, I would say, is I grew up in Oklahoma, small town in Oklahoma, and in this very small town in 1961 or 2 or 3, I ended up with a copy of Chuang Tzu, Genius of the Absurd. And the absurdity of finding a book on Chinese philosophy, a deep Chinese philosophy, at that age is ridiculous. And I have no idea how I ended up with that book. And it would make me so mad, I picked up a habit of throwing books. So I would read it or try to understand it. And of course, 40, 50 years later, it's like they don't bother me so much, the little stories that they tell, because they communicate by telling stories. And I grew up in a Native American culture, and the primary method of teaching is storytelling. Okay. Now, when we'll call them Europeans arrived, they decided that we were a primitive culture because we didn't have written language, but we were richer than most people in our storytelling. All right. So kind of from that one instance, I developed an interest in history, Chinese history, Russian history, and that continues. And I expanded in it by starting Kung Fu with a Chinese grandmaster when I was 18 years old. That opened up even more things. I basically got kicked out of pre-med because I asked too many questions. Remember that curiosity thing? And it just kept on going from there. So I took up the study of Chinese medicine. And another odd thing, at 8 years old, I started in on Einsteinian physics and worked my way up from there. So laser physics. So hand in hand, Chinese medicine, Native American medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and then quantum physics and physics in general have kind of been my interest. And out of that, I basically decided that there should be a common language, and like in mysticism and all these other things, they confuse you with a lot of the language. And so by borrowing the language of computers now and physics, I think we can come to a better understanding of kind of like all kinds of phenomena. And there's certainly a lot of it that is classified as forbidden knowledge. I always loved that. And basically around 16, I started haunting every bookstore and thing I could find on all those forbidden subjects. Of course, starting with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is kind of like what everybody starts with back then, I think. So, and it's gotten progressively worse. I have several thousand books in my library. So.
Now, it seems once you start getting deep into some of these topics, the deeper you go, the more connected everything becomes. This big paranormal soup is now not just ghosts, it's now, it could be aliens, UFOs, spirits, cryptids. I believe that it's all connected together, but not only that, it's all connected to us and our consciousness. You look at CE5 sessions or people going out and trying to communicate with UFOs and getting responses through this psychic communication. I mean, I've had my own contact experience where, I've had instant contact, psychic communication with an entity through meditation, and it's just, it really opened my eyes to how connected we are to everything and how everything is made up of energy. And I want to talk about how everything in the universe could be alive or conscious, and how it's all connected together. I know it's a big question, a big subject to kind of start with, but where should we start when we're talking about things like this nature?
I get phone calls. This afternoon, a lady called me from LA. I do not know her. And she goes, "Can you explain to me like the jinn and entities and demons and spirit attachments and all these things?" And I said, "Actually, yes, I can." And she goes, "So are they plasma beings and blah, blah?" And I'm like, okay, here we go. So everything in the universe is energy. Everybody's got to start somewhere. Physicists start with a miracle. They call it the Big Bang. They don't want to talk about what happened before the miracle happened. And then they run with the miracle. But if we go with the whole universe is basically energy. In physics, they call it direct sea of energy. I mean, we can get technical with it, but there's no need to. And then energy slowed down is information. Information slowed down is physical matter. This is a progression. And so then we can say, okay, now we have existence and all this different stuff. But information, it basically is consciousness. That's it. It's the interaction with consciousness. But there's a little gap there. And the gap is that our thoughts are a form of energy, and we can create thought forms, and we can interact with things that are of a things that are of a thought nature. So actually, she was asking me about, like, are these things plasma? And the answer is, if you create a thought form, which is a lot of people, dumping data and energy into a thought or an idea, and if you do that enough, it creates a form, a morphic field, a morphic form. This is esoteric. This is all in your secret teachings and mystical occult teachings. And eventually it takes what we call an etheric form. So the etheric is your base level. It's the first layer of your energy field. And it contains a lot of energy and a lot of information. If you keep increasing the amount of energy in that form, then it might take on a plasma type form. It might take on Ghostbusters type information. Right. And it becomes more visible and on and on and on. And so now we could describe why we see ET as plasma forms, etheric forms, even to some degree physical forms, because if you keep increasing the data, if you keep increasing the information, it takes on a reality. And then that becomes what is called local reality. And everybody has a local reality. And then you add in one more thing. All the physicists and everybody wants to talk about dimensions. And it's much better to use the language of intersections. So the other thing is, it's better to talk about realities as a better way of referring to all this. So we could say the reality of communication by other than vocal means. We don't have to go to telepathy. We can say that some people are receivers and some people are transmitters. And if we wanted to go farther, we could go to Konstantin Karakov's work in Russia and Seekers Find the Iron Curtain. And all of that tells you that our sensory apparatus extends beyond our five senses. So we get away from, and I'm a big thing about some of the language we use, like ESP. It's not extrasensory. It is part of our makeup. It's something that almost everybody has to some degree. The only difference is those people that, what I say, learn to listen as opposed to hear music say. They learn to listen to the ether, the etheric. And there's a lot of chatter out there.
Yeah,
So
that makes
yeah.
sense. And when you were saying that, different dimensions, you like to call them intersections. I thought that was very interesting. And this is a huge topic that I've covered quite a lot, is the possibility of different dimensions or realms or whatever you want to call this, omniverse, whatever we're living
Right.
in, that there are different realities or multiple different realities occurring at the same time. What
Right.
is your understanding of how this is occurring and what is actually existing in these different realities?
Well, you have a local reality. One day, way in the future, I'll probably publish a book called Theory of Proximate Reality. And I've been working on it forever. And one of those things is what we call set theory, I propose. And that is that you can only translate so much of what goes on in reality. And it's limited to your senses, physical senses. And then what happens is there's other senses that are needed to be able to talk to your dead grandma or, ET or anybody else. And it doesn't mean that communication's not going on, because that communication's going on all the time. So we are trans-dimensional or trans-reality or trans-universe, whatever you want to call it. And we're able to listen to some of that. That's a Native American teaching, by the way, is learning to listen. And, one of my favorite things is if you can't listen to trees and plants, you're probably going to have a hard time listening to ET. And because that's a form of communication that is non-physical. It's something that can be developed. There's exercises I give for it, and I've trained people in it, and that's being able to hear what is actually coming across. And so we call those people dog whisperers, tree whisperers, all this language. And but it's a common trait and something that was exercised, like say, by Native Americans over many centuries. Now, the local reality, your reality only extends about 3 to 9 feet, let's say. Okay, that's it. So one of the things that happens, though, is like when you dream, you go into a dream state, you take your senses with you. Your senses are absent the body. The body actually kind of goes into a rigor to keep you from moving too much or hurting yourself. And of course, if you have violent dreams or whatever, you override that. You come out of it. And so you come out of that dream state, which means your senses return to you. Harvard University did a study, and they said, yeah, you take your senses with you. And so this is one of the critical things that happened to me when I was about 18. I was working at a mental hospital. I was wanting to be a psychiatrist and doctor and pay for my way through school. And I marched into the head psychiatrist one day and I said, all those people in the crazy ward, technical term, right? They're not lying. And he said, what? And I said, the stories they tell and the reality they are relating to and referring to is real. It's just not here in the sense that you can reach out and touch your phone or something, right? But it is no less a reality. So that calls into all these questions about people that are schizophrenic or have ET encounters or anything else. There's a reality to what they're saying. And so I was trying to discover how all that works. And what I came up with is a theory of information density. Okay. So if I tell you something, I could be lying. I could be telling you something consciously that doesn't extend into my subconscious and my unconscious and into my memory fields, which are about 20 something. So one of the things I do is what I call field data density calibrations. So if you say you've been to 20 years in the secret space program, I would say that the density of that information is true for you, but may not extend into general reality, right? Forget general relativity, right? General reality becomes something that really needs to be discussed.
Yeah, that's
Does that help?
that's a very deep topic, and I do want to get into that. Earlier, you mentioned that some people can be receivers, some people can be transmitters. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and what's going on there?
The language would probably be sympathetic vibration, and I'm not going to get into string theory and all kinds of things with that, but basically it's kind of like listening to a song and you start vibrating to it. You start becoming synchronized with it, or you say you go into a harmonic. Well, if you take sound as what I call a coarse communication, a finer communication will be an etheric communication, and it's more of like say learning to listen maybe at a little higher note on the scale, like on the piano. Okay. And it's one of the things we know is that we are very limited in the electromagnetic spectrum as far as interaction. But one of the things about like yoga and some of the mystical arts and all the esoteric arts is they really want you to be able to learn or experience or hear or interact with more than what we would call a standard dimensionality or standard reality. And so all the people that do ESP or hear people or talk to or communicate or channels, in my language, yeah, they're channels. They have more channels available to them than a normal person. And a normal person basically is closed to those channels. Their radio doesn't pick them up. So
now, would you say that everybody has the ability to open up these channels with kind of practice and training?
Yes. I give exercises to develop awareness. It's what I call the first martial art I teach. And those exercises are meant to expand your ability to hear, just like you do weightlifting or something, to grow in that medium. And then the same thing for being able to hear at those higher harmonics or higher levels. So I've taught Kundalini Yoga for about 40 something years. Mm-hmm. The exercises in Kundalini Yoga will develop your sensitivity. They will develop your awareness. And combined with other exercises that I've given to like special forces and stuff, you can really develop a sensitivity far beyond what would be normal. But most of the time, most people don't need that kind of sensitivity. It actually works against them. And so too much sensitivity and basically you become incapacitated, or you withdraw your senses, or you withdraw into yourself. And we have lots of instances of those, of people doing that. So
now you mentioned an interesting word that I'm sure a lot of people don't really have a complete understanding or grasp, and that's Kundalini. And
Yeah.
people can do Kundalini yoga, but what is Kundalini, and how does this? I've hear
Okay.
people awakening this in their body, and it's a form of energy, right?
Um, the Kundalini Yoga, they is referred to as the mother of all yogas. So most people understand yoga as Hatha yoga, and anybody that's interested, and I love this. I had people would come to class and go, "Can we watch?" And the answer is no. Right? It's experiential, but for people that want to experience it intellectually, you would read the autobiography of a yogi. So Kundalini Yoga, they say all 8 limbs of yoga are combined. And so we have Hatha Yoga, which is postures. We have Pranayama, which is breathing. We have Raja Yoga, which is mental concentration, focusing. And Kriya Yoga, which combines several of those. Sound Yoga, Nod. It goes all over the place. But if you combine all of them, you get an experience that is, we say, multiplied. You do all those at once. Like in Kundalini Yoga, you'd have a breath, you'd have a posture, you'd have a mudra, you'd have maybe a sound or a mantra going. And so you develop a depth of experiential reality that is able to handle that many inputs. So most people only handle 1 or 2 inputs at a time. Kind of like if you're driving down the road and texting. One's a function of the intellect and one's a function of motor control. And there's a gap when you go from one to the other. That's how you have car wrecks. Don't do it. So all yoga is beneficial. It's just that Kundalini Yoga, if you take all the combination of events going on and activities, the experience of it is it takes more energy to experience that. So there's an additional inflow or additional flow through the body of additional energy. And without being esoteric about it, that's the Kundalini Yoga. That's the Kundalini energy that's developed through it. And it works. And I can tell you it works because it worked for me. So I should qualify that. Because everybody that tells you to do something is basically telling you to do something that worked for them without consideration of whether it works for you. And so I tell people they should find that which works for them. It's like you don't need to believe me or necessarily come to me because there's lots of teachers out there. So
Yeah,
does that
very well said.
explain better?
Yes,
Right.
very
You
much.
didn't?
I want to kind of tackle the huge consciousness question here of what is consciousness, where does it come from, how are we all connected. I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, and she brought up a very thought-provoking kind of I guess it was a comparison or a metaphor of consciousness. And thank you, Gloria, for this, by the way, because I've been thinking about it. That all consciousness is from one source, and she looks at it as like a huge light source that if you put a colander over it, and the light goes out through all the different holes, and that's basically us and creation coming from this one entity of consciousness. I mean, is that something that you'd agree with at all?
Remember that set theory?
Yeah.
It's we could say there's an ultimate consciousness. Mm-hmm. And then we could say, well, in set theory, how many filters do you have? And so I have a filter from a geophysical filter. How much of your religious beliefs are dependent on where you were born or where you were raised? How much of your identity comes through a filter of your parents' teachings or indoctrinations, whatever you want to call it. So you have a lot of filters, and then you also have something called personality. And one of the questions came up today was that you have a personality before you were born. That personality was existing. Now, it didn't have a physical form, right? There's a classic Zen question of Cohen about what was the face you had before you were born, right? And the face you had was your personality. You come with a preset personality. And then the other filters become localized to your reality, right? The language you speak, whether or not you're open to ESP or extrasensory type encounters or additional information flows, which include talking to trees or plants or animals or dead people or whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever's out there. And so those filters come to identify us as ourselves. We become individualized or individuation, right? And to me, it's a form of what I call devolution. You, instead of evolving, you come from a higher state down into a devolved physical state. Well, that's energy, information, and matter. And matter maybe doesn't relate to energy as well as it should. And we know that because we relate to information better. We're information junkies. And so the original ball of light that she's referring to, I just call the universe or the field as a better language. And in the field, we would say there's all kinds of information, and that individuation determines what you are able to access or participate in.
Now, as far as what happens after we die, you discuss on your show death as transcendent, and I also view it as that, but I don't know. I don't know what happens. A lot of guests I've had discuss reincarnation and how we could have possible soul contracts, and choose to come back and incarnate on whatever we are on this planet, and that our spirits, of course, are eternal, and we have the choice to come back or not. I want to get your thoughts on this. What actually do you believe is going on when we die, and what happens to our energy?
I can address that. I died about 7 times over the course of a week. And every time they'd roll the crash card in, I would kind of like, oh, I hate electricity, by the way. Remember energy. And I would come back alive, and they wouldn't have to use the electric on me. And I don't remember, after the 7th time or something, basically I woke up one day. And it's an interesting thing that no time had transpired. Like, I remember from a Friday at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I woke up the following Saturday or Sunday or something. And to me, there was no experience of time. Now, what happens is that right before I woke up, all I could see was what would be called that ball of energy that your friend was referring to, your guest was. And the only thought I had was, wow, that's beautiful. And that's when I came back in the body, because what I did, I had differentiated myself from that. I had been in that, whatever it was, and there's no way to describe it except that if you looked at the sun through one of these telescopes and they see all that roiling and boiling and movement on the surface of the sun, to me, that's what it looked like. And so now we go into individual experience. And I mean, other people may have seen streets of gold or virgins or whatever, right? And so what one of my teachers said is that you experience your own reality that you have developed. We call it the ego reality. And so that has a lot to do with what you see. When you come back, I can tell you there are differences. There's personality differences that I have been informed about myself from friends. And also your timelines change. And so we could say that you're born and die, and that's a timeline. And through the process of that death, I guess I ended that timeline. And I have a set of podcasts coming up, hopefully pretty soon, and it's going to be called X Timelines, and with Randy Veitenheimer. And I'm going to talk about these, like how we all have these timelines. Just like a guy at the store today, he said, "What's your show about?" And I said, "Well, like you have a job here, you'll probably have a job after here. You had a relationship, a marriage, and you'll have another one. You had a house and you moved to another house. Those are all timelines." and even long timelines like ET visitation or communication. We can look at those timelines and see what's available. And part of that is what I call field interactive. And what that means is, like, when you have a dream state, like you poke somebody's daydream and they go, oh, I was somewhere else. To me, immediately curiosity, where is that somewhere else? And can I go visit there too? And so that's been a basis of my research, that and something called life force. I have been hard trying to discover what that is and the methods of transference and interaction, because I think that holds the key to human life itself. So,
well, could you elaborate on what you believe? What are you calling life force?
well, if you're dead, you don't have it.
It makes sense.
So one of the things in science, we say you don't define something by a negative, right? But they try to do it all the time. So I'll just jump in there and say it's something you don't have when you're dead. But
simple enough.
It's also something that one of the things I noticed that they gave me a 2-year-old at one of my little cousins at the zoo one day when I was a prime martial artist. I was about 30. And my cousin said, here you go, take this one. I had about 5 or 6 kids there. I chased that 2-year-old for about 4 hours around that zoo. She ran the whole time from one exhibit to the other. And I finally picked her up and took her back to her mom and dad and said, I quit. I said, I cannot keep up with this child, even though I thought I was a great martial artist and all this stuff. And that really alerted me that a 2-year-old has a perfect energy flow. It is nonstop. And so if we change that to life force, then what the heck happened to you? Where does that go? What are the impediments or blocks or locks that keep you from having that same energy when you're 60 or 70 years old, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I found is that in the secret martial arts teachings, which there used to be quite a few, in Kundalini Yoga, these are all things that can enhance energy flow. And if we translate energy flow to life force, then now we have something that we could work at and find out more things about. And so a lot of my meditation and research is trying to lock this down, because everybody has it that's alive, and we don't know the source of it. We don't know the method of transference or communication or enhancement, and it's not Coca-Cola and Monster drinks or any of these other things that we say that we get energy from. Even food is a poor substitute for a deep inhale as far as bringing energy into the body. So
yeah, that is
I hope that answers it. I mean, I'm still researching, but basically if you look at your 2-year-old self, that was an ideal energy state. And so that gives us a reference point. That gives us a metric, and we can calibrate away from it. And obviously if you're sick, you don't have enough energy to support the whole system. And that's one of the things when I work on people is reset them to be themselves. Most people aren't. And reset them to have a high energy state. And so you can accomplish that on your own, but that's what I do for my clients and my students. So
yeah, you are 100% right about 2-year-olds. My girlfriend has a 2-year-old, and I don't know where he gets it. I don't know. It's constant, nonstop.
Right. Yeah. But I want that.
Yeah,
I want that. Right. I want that source, and I want to identify what is it that allows that energy flow through. And it's a phenomenal thing to watch, and then to actually look at yourself and go, what am I missing here? Okay.
Right.
So
now I want to kind of go to how we could possibly tap into this collective consciousness and other realms of reality, and different methods of doing so, such as, simple enough, psychedelics, things of that nature like ayahuasca or psilocybin. I'd like to get your thoughts on what is occurring during these experiences, because, explanations we hear from modern academia and science don't always make sense, and they've done scans of the brain, and it doesn't look like there's much activity going on at all during some of these experiences, and people
Right.
have profound spiritual experiences during this. So I'd like to get your thoughts on what is occurring during some of these
Okay.
psychedelic occurrences.
Okay. The number one thing is where did that experience take place? Okay. So if we go back to dream states, which Jung and all kinds of people have written about, they don't talk about it being a place. Okay. They call it a dream state. Well, we could call it a dream reality. Now, what composes reality? It's what I call a landscape. It's a landscape that's populated with trees and animals and birds and sky and dirt and just throw in as much as you can. And so that's why I say it's better to talk about realities, like the number of realities that are out there. And Sir Paul Twitchell wrote a book called The Tiger's Fang back in the 50s or 60s. And he laid out 4,000 of them in that book. So, like you say, realms, dimensions, universes, it goes on forever. And each of those is not only a reality, it's a populated reality. It has different experiences. And one of my favorites, it has different laws. Like when people bring up the laws of physics, they'll go, well, I don't subscribe to those laws, right? Because they don't include the abilities I have. And a lot of other people have also. And so when we look at drugs like ayahuasca and psilocybin, a lot of and of course my favorite is tobacco. I don't use it, never have. The Native Americans use tobacco as a sacrament. So the idea of smoking 30 times a day just makes total nonsense. It's taking something out of context. Right. Now, that's important because all drug experiences are out of context. They have high content because you're shutting down this reality and this input and accepting another that literally overwhelms all the senses. And so therefore, it gains a certain density of information, right? We're back to that again. And that density can be overwhelming. It can be a greater reality than this reality we live in. So when those people describe things like that, they're describing a reality that they participated in. And I dislike intensely all the people that say, oh, no, you didn't experience that, or you didn't have that experience, or you didn't talk to Bigfoot, or whatever the heck. The ayahuasca, in my opinion, and I've had a lot of clients call me where I've had to kind of bring them back to this reality, because they literally get hung up over there, or into some degree. And of course, we see this with anybody that does heavy drugs, is that they have exchanged this reality for one that has high density information, but not much what we would call landscape. The landscape is bare. So if we go to Castaneda, whichever way you pronounce it, Carlos Castaneda, in his books, Yaqui Way of Knowledge, if you read those carefully, what they're describing is getting out of this reality and jumping into another one. And so we do that every 4 years here. We call it an election. One of my bad jokes. So we exchange one reality for another. And divorce does the same thing. And that's another bad joke I tell. So, but if you take those drugs, one of the things that happened is, what makes you think you're qualified to be able to do that encounter or that trip? Okay. And so historically, like all the mystery schools and stuff, you would go through a certain amount of preparation. Oh, that went right out the window with the 60s.
Right.
And I was there. I lived on Sunset Strip in Haight-Ashbury in 1968, and tune in, turn on, and drop out.
Well, that was kind of intentional by some of our own government, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The LSD and stuff was developed in government programs, and that's not a conspiracy. That's what I love people. Oh, yeah, no, right? So anyway, you may not have the capacity to you certainly have the capacity to engage in those psychedelic or whatever experiences, but you may not have the mechanisms to be able to integrate, synchronize, and become congruent with that new source of information.
Now,
That's important. Okay. That's one of the things: integration, synchronization, congruency, meaning I can accept it, I can fold it into my life or my timeline, and I can work with it. And there becomes a problem. I do this with corporate clients. It's the three major things that go along with all their activities. And if you don't have high correlation with those three, then you are going to have a bad trip. And that's the language we used in the hippie days.
Right. And would you say that we could access some of that same information in those same realms without using those substances?
Yes, absolutely. And people say, how do you do this? Well, you sit down generally of an evening, because the psychic field is much calmer, right? Especially at 3:45 in the morning.
Right.
And close your eyes. As soon as you close your eyes, you are in a different reality. You don't have to go far, okay? Because we are what I call photonic existence. We see everything as light and photons, but there's a soton, there's a sound reality. Think of bats, not to bring up recent history.
Right.
And then think of smell, right? And I don't even know what to call those, smotons or something. But animals sense the universe that is so expanded from ours compared to what we smell. So you start thinking about all these different talents or ways of interacting with the universe. And think about the information density available to a bloodhound. Think about the information available to a hawk or an eagle, this Native American terms. You know, they can see a mouse at 22 miles away or something, right? We have no idea, but we have that capacity. And of course, all your esoteric teachings, all your cities in yoga and yogic teachings, Vedic teachings, they allude to the ability to assume some of these talents. And in Native American, we say the same thing, that you have the ability to what we call see farth, right? And what that means is be able to see the future. And so that's another skill set. And I teach some basic skills in all of these. And so it's within our ability to expand ourselves. And I don't like the language expand our consciousness so much as expand our awareness to include in our consciousness all these things we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
that makes
everybody has that ability. Right.
That's great. Now I want to shift to what you call creative energetic health, because right now, man, people have a major problem with our medical, mainstream medical mafia, like I call it, because just even in the past 2 years, the things we found out and the lies that we've been told, and going back to different, I guess, historical events that have happened involving our medical industry. It's just, it's become a major problem, I believe, for society, especially when not only our medical industry, but our government and corporations are poisoning people to get them to go to this medical mafia and try and cure themselves, and then they end up dead because they poison themselves more. So I think that, these kind of alternative healing methods and energy healing is very important to look at right now. And I've experienced it myself, and I know it works. A lot of people are skeptical. They call it woo-woo, and they don't want to even, look at it because mainstream science says so. But a lot of people are starting to, and I think it's very important, and it's very encouraging to me that people are. So tell us about what creative energetic health is.
Okay. Remember, I have a problem with language. So Back in the 90s, the medical establishment decided that they would label any practice that wasn't American medicine as alternative medicine. And I was in Santa Fe recently and at a community dining table, and the guy next to me obviously was a surgeon, older man. He said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I practice medicine." He's like, "Me too." And I go, "Chinese medicine." He goes, "Oh, alternative medicine." So that was a derogatory term. And we could even call it racist.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one. Number two, I had a client they interviewed in Oklahoma, and he was from Thailand. And I'd worked with him and his family on a whole range of issues. And the interviewer said, "Well, how do you find America, blah, blah, blah. And well, what do you do for healthcare here?" And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, do you go to American doctors?" And he goes, "No, we don't get American illnesses." Now, think about that statement, okay? And if you think of medicine and illnesses as thought forms, okay, it's like, why do you want to participate in that thought form? And so then we go, well, what's the exit strategy for that thought form? And this is very important. Oh, and by the way, they said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I go to Randy." So my whole family does. But if you think of those thought forms, it's like, well, I don't participate in that disease. And we can look at the human population and say, well, there's a great many people that will never get cancer, right? But nobody ever wants to explore that, okay? And it's not that I don't believe in it. It's just I don't participate in it. I have no desire to. And so then we say, well, what have you done to not participate? And of course, now we say, well, drugs, pharmaceuticals. But then like, well, I go walking and, I play outside and drink water and whatever. Those are all things that you can do to maintain your health. But here's a basic issue. Remember the 2-year-old? A 2-year-old rarely gets sick. And if they do, it's very short and they come out of it really quick. And I think that's a perfect medical model. Yeah. And then the doctor back in Santa Fe, I said, well, I teach and practice medical Qigong therapy, Qigong, because I've studied it for 40 years. And I said, I also study and teach Ayurvedic medicine and Native American medicine. And I've been around and studied American medicine. So I'm not a doctor. I just happen to have about 50 years of study behind me and experience with about, 20 or 30,000 clients. So if you get sick, my model is you don't have enough energy to maintain your health, right? Now we're back to pranayama, deep breathing, yoga exercises, and ET, energy transfer. And energy transfer goes in two directions. I give you energy or I take your energy. We can look at anything you eat, drink, do, sleep, anything falls in that category. Now, the third point is that creative energy is probably one of the most, we'll call it, available and benign and healthy thing you can do. To be creative. I don't care if you're a cook at McDonald's. I don't care if you're an artist. I'm an artist. I paint. But there's like anything you do creatively is going to access or open up. Remember that energy flow, that life force? People that are creative have more life force than those that aren't. That's one of my discoveries I found when I was researching this. And so I was trying to come up with a name, and I said creative energetic health. In other words, all life is creative. Remember, God said that, created the world kind of thing. And then it's energetic. And then to be healthy is actually a state or a reality that you assume. Okay. And what that means is, I'll give it to you the way I learned it. One day I went to my mother, I was about 8 years old, and I said, I don't feel well. I need to go to a doctor. And she says, son, we can't afford a doctor, so don't get sick. And we call that a direct programming. And so probably the best thing you could ever do to your children is like, anytime they even think about being sick, it's like, don't do it, right?
Right.
And so I asked my mother later about this. She was in her late 60s, and she had to go to the hospital finally because she wouldn't let me help her. Another story. And she went to the hospital as a gallbladder. And I filled out the paperwork, and the doctor comes and goes, well, who filled out this paperwork? And I go, I did. And they go, she's never been in a hospital. I go, nope. She's never been sick. Nope. She's never, no, all no's all the way down. I said, she smokes, she drinks, and she's in perfect health except for her gallbladder. So we can throw away all this, don't drink, don't smoke, don't this. And here's the rule, as long as it doesn't bother you, okay? As long as it doesn't cause an effect in the body, right? Then you're basically immune to it, okay? And of course, my favorite one that got me in trouble with when I was in pre-med is, how do you get a cold? I've never had a doctor answer that. And by the way, they've never asked me, how do you get rid of it? Because all colds go away in about 3 days. And then I said, so you're telling me that there's a cold virus, which is a thought form, by the way, and may have no physicality to it, that it has a mind that tells it in 3 days it needs to go somewhere else? And of course, they call me crazy, right? And I'm like, did you ever take logic, right? It makes no sense to get a cold. It makes no sense to not have it later, okay? And so that becomes part of our nonsensical pharmaceutical industry and forms of medicine. Yes. And don't call me crazy, because to me, it's just an energy state. And so one of the things I teach is, if you have a 9-foot energy field, this is back to yoga and the etheric field and everything else, you probably won't get sick in your lifetime. That's it. That's creative energetic health, to reset somebody to be themselves and to have a big energy field. And at that point, you're good, pretty much no matter what you do. So yeah, that's where it came from. Right?
This seems like it would be a huge threat to mainstream medical industry and corporations and pharmaceuticals. So do you think that this will ever be considered by mainstream academia, corporations, medical industry?
No, I mean, I've given lectures to a group of doctors, and at the end of it, they were mad as hell, because there was a guy, we were at a group meeting, and one of the guys there was complaining he had been riding a bike and fell. And he was in extreme pain. And all these doctors were standing around. I said, tell me what you would do. And each of them, well, I give them this, do this. And I go, watch this. I reached over and tapped him on the shoulder, and I go, how's your pain? He goes, it's gone. And they're like, and I go, that's what I would do. And God, they were mad. And they go, yeah, well, there's only one of you. And I go, no, I'm teaching now, right? And so it's not just that I'm teaching. Anybody out there that engages their own health, if they walk, if they do massage, if they do anything that they think will help them, that is literally being creative with their own health. And so I tell people, lift weights, go run, go swim, go dance, do anything that makes you feel better, because feeling better is a state of having more energy than you had before you did that. So
yeah, and
it's everywhere.
Would you agree that there is this kind of, I hate to say conspiracy, but this agenda to keep people sick, whether it be for power or to keep the money flowing to the pharmaceutical companies and to the government? But that it's pretty apparent to me. What are your thoughts?
Well, you're describing an outcome, and it's a very definite outcome if you have any sense of history. Okay, you could make the statement that people are maybe less mobile, right? And it doesn't have to be physical. They can be less mentally agile. Okay, they could be restrictive in what's available to them information-wise. Remember that curiosity thing. And so one of my teachers, professors, J. Clayton Fever, said, you're a bubble and you need to continually expand that bubble with information and activities and basically skill sets as a way to always maintain being alive at a high level, okay? And so what we see is people being alive at a low level, or a sustenance level. And you don't see exuberance out there too much right now, even in the children. And I think that's very sad, right? So what's exuberance? That's excess energy, right? And people say to me, "You're way too excited," right? And I go, all the time, because I have more energy flowing through me than would be normal for somebody in their 70s, right? So, and so I maintain those high energy levels because I know how to do that, and I know how to get other people to do that. But one of the things I think is interesting, Oklahoma State University and a couple other places have allowed me to lecture. And then some of the other universities don't want any part of it. Like Harvard University, I laugh at some of their curriculum. From an ego standpoint, it's like, I should be teaching this course, and I would be teaching a lot different what they're teaching. And yet their teachings are acceptable, even if they're inferior or wrong. And my teachings are unacceptable because, like you say, it violates the narrative of you need to be complacent and complicit to what they think the world looks like or what you should do. And that's why I have this T-shirt that says no. And I made that T-shirt. Anybody can email me at energydoctor, spelled with a K, and I'll see about sending you one. Awesome. So no becomes an important answer when it comes to your own health. It's like, what's wrong with that answer? It's like, if you're going to die of cancer, well, you're probably going to die of chemo too, and you're probably going to die of radiation. And so now it becomes like, take your pick. But they don't want you to have a choice in the matter. And I know that I've worked with a lot of cancer patients. And it's like, no, you have to do this. And the answer in life is like, no, I don't have to do anything. What I should do is decide which way I'm going to go. Okay. And to do that would require you to be somewhat rational. And of course, fear state rations the first thing that disappears. And we can see that in our world now. And so ration and logic, if you use logic, then you're going to be a pariah. Because all of it becomes illogical, right? That's one thing where the paranormal, and I don't like the word para, okay, because it's just all part of our normal existence, is where we should explore what it means and what I can do. And of course, out of that comes everything from crystals to whatever. And if it works, I have no problem with any science behind it. I don't need science behind something that works, whether it's healing hands or, Reiki, Chinese medicine. It goes on massage. I mean, we can go down a list a mile long. But what we're dealing with is ET, energy transfer. And it is available, whether it's plants, rocks, the earth itself. I can give you 1,000 different ways that people have healed themselves throughout history. And my comment is, you should do one that works for you. That's it. Yeah. And not worry about the science behind it. So.
Yeah, very well said.
And if it doesn't work, well, you die and you get to see the big light, and better luck next time.
There you go. Well, Randy, to close on tonight, I want to get your thoughts on the possibilities of how, to what degree can we kind of manifest our own reality and change a negative timeline, a negative future timeline, which a lot of people believe we're headed to right now, and maybe collectively change it to a positive one. And do you think that's even possible?
Yes, no, yes, yes. How's that?
Perfect.
I got confused. There was too many questions there. Okay, a timeline. Number one, you're not on your own as a rule. Okay, if we look at it as a linear progression from point A to point B, born at A, died at B, born at 0, died at 1, as one of my teachers said, then that linear progression for most people is not a straight path. And that's where we get the language of a path, both in Vedic literature and Zen Buddhism and everything, to be on a path. And so it's better language, say you're on a trajectory, kind of like you fire a bullet. It's going to go the way it's going to go unless it's interfered with by outside forces. And that becomes a key, because most people have outside forces from the very beginning. We call them moms and dads. Then we call them teachers. Then we call them spouses and bosses. It goes on forever. Each of these is altering your timeline, right? And the other thing I found out is if you veer off your timeline far enough, it becomes more painful the farther you go. And so at some point you quit. At some point you divorce. At some point you stop. And usually at that point, you come back to your original timeline, okay? And so I wonder if dying all that time, like for me, kicked me back to my original timeline. And that's one of the things I've been exploring. So can you change your timeline? Yes. All you have to do is sit down. And this is where I give an explanation of that. And one of these days, if I ever see her again, Helen Hope Busby. I actually kind of looked her up the other day, but Helen Hope Busby, I went out on a date in college with her. And it was just a walk over to hear some music. And we sit down, and about 5 minutes, she stood up and goes, "This isn't working for me." And when I tell this, and she walked off. And I was like astounded at first. And then I started laughing. And when I tell that story, a lot of women get excited and go, "Well, she was mean," or this. I go, no, she was stating a cosmic truth, right? And that cosmic truth is, this is not working for me. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to apologize. I don't have to elucidate. I don't have to do anything except move on with my life. And so when you go in and find fault with people, you don't have to find fault with anything going on with your life. All you have to do is say, this is not working for me. And at that point, you should find something that does, or find someone that agrees with you, right? And what will work, okay? So it is possible to change your timeline. Pain is an excellent reference point. How much pain are you in before you have to, what we call, resolve that, before you have to abandon that or let go of that time portion of the timeline that has moved you so away from yourself that you're not yourself. And that's why I said I reset people. And then so it is possible to change it. And then what was the other question?
Well, it's about manifesting your own reality.
Oh, okay.
And power of positive energy and thinking. I've witnessed this myself. It can,
Remember that local reality? So one of the things, and this is, I will not mention names at this point, they, right? The mystical they, that's another thing I'm working on. They'll tell you can manifest reality, and that's patently untrue. Okay. And they cite Michael's Morley experiment, double slit experiment, anyway, observer and all this other stuff. That may be a portion of it. I did a little video, it's on YouTube or something, where I said, these are the 7 things they left out. I was sitting in Central Park up in New York City, and I decided I had enough of it. And so one of the things that happens is we say that reality tends to manifest if conditions in the field are appropriate. That's something everybody can write down. Reality tends to manifest if conditions in the field are appropriate. The second thing is quantum collapse. Quantum collapse says that reality is reality, and we only go from reality to reality. And so therefore, we only go from perfection to perfection. It says nothing about whether you like it or not. And then we go to local reality, and this becomes the one that all of them leave out. And I could go down a big, long list of people that say you can manifest reality, or you can manifest anything. Well, number one, the biggest problem I have, and without, what's his name? Anyway, I won't say that name. When they say you can do this, the answer is no, you are not you. This became the biggest problem I tried to resolve. If I could reset somebody to be themselves, then the potential for them to do something to manifest a reality increases significantly, okay? Number 2, circumstances. That reality is not available. If you're sitting in the middle of Death Valley and you say, I want a beautiful wife, it's not available there. And they don't allow for what we call geomorphic fields as a potential aspect of your life and your reality. In other words, you're not the same person with the same religion if you were born in Iraq or Provo, Utah, or you see what I mean? All these different places. So we ignore that. And you can't ignore all these things and then say, oh yeah, you can manifest reality and pay me $9.95 and in a 6-week course. One I love, and you can probably find it.
Yeah.
One of the famous ones out there the other day, I saw an ad. You can manifest $77 million. And I thought, wow,
sweet.
What if you had 10,000 followers, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I've never met one of those persons that has manifested $77 million, right? And if you have, please call me and share the wealth, is what we'd say in hippie days.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, I hope that answers. It's like, there's more things involved. Now, being able to say this doesn't work for me implies its corollary, this does work for me. And if you want to be successful, I would tell you, do what works for you and abandon what doesn't work for you. And like Helen Hope Busby said, this isn't working for me. That's a statement of fact. There's no emotion in that. And so when you take all that emotion out, you're able to move much cleaner between changes. And of course, what do we have now is a major time of change. And you got to be able to say as you move forward, this works for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, simple and easy to remember. This doesn't work for me. Yeah.
Randy, it's a great metric, right?
Yeah, it is. It's awesome.
Start applying. And there's no embarrassment. I mean, you know, you go to a restaurant and it's bad service. All you do is say, this isn't working for me. You chose the restaurant. You see what I mean? There's no reason to be mad at the restaurant. None at all.
Right.
There's no judgment there. This doesn't work for me. Let's go. And, you know, you wake up and look at your wife or husband and go, you know, this ain't working for me. I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
And everybody will be mad. And you know why they're mad? Because it was working for the other person.
Yeah.
So,
and you can apply it to everything. That's great.
Yeah. And so it's actually a non-judgmental thing. And that becomes really important because you go out of guilt and shame and all kinds of lower consciousness. And I'd recommend everybody read Power versus Force, and we can talk about consciousness itself as an expression. And that's one question I didn't answer earlier. Consciousness is an expression of energy. That gets into a big, long subject, and we'll do that another time.
Yeah. Speaking of another time, we barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff. I would love to have you back on in the near future.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and before you head out, let the audience know your website is energydoctor.com, right? Right.
Energydoctor@me.com. That's my email address. And then you can find me Energy Doctor on ENERGYDOKTOR on Facebook and YouTube and some other things. And like I said, I have this new podcast I'm working on. And that was the new microphone I was playing with earlier. And it's called X Timelines. And I'm going to be exploring all this because all relationships and all interactions in life are basically a timeline. And we can explore that. I can explore it online with you or anybody of my clients, and we can see what's going on and what happened, who initiated it, and if it's positive or negative, and how you change it. All that's available because all that information is available in the field if you will train yourself to be able to access it. So
awesome. Randy, thank you so much again. That was a blast. I had a great time talking to you and look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Yes, I love it. Thank you, because this is information I feel like if people can come to a greater understanding of what goes on around in the reality that we're facing right now, they're going to do much better. They're going to be okay. That's what I call it. So
definitely.
Right? But yeah, give me a call. I'd love to talk more. Right?
Awesome. Well, until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.